Om Ajnanatirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I bow to the Divine Guru, whose wisdom is like a healing medicine, removing the cataract of ignorance from my eyes, revealing to me the path that leads to liberation and freedom. Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. For those who don't know me, my name is Naren, and I'm happy to be giving this talk. I'm speaking to a computer screen once again, as I have been for the past 4 or 5 months, rather than being with all of you, but we're making the best of these times and taking advantage of this wonderful technology. Prejudice is no stranger to the human experience. This prayer that I just chanted, removing the cataracts from the eyes, removing the ignorance that prevents us from truly seeing. Well, prejudice is one of those. Prejudice is a disease that poisons the soul and prevents the soul from truly seeing. And it is very, very important to be aware of prejudice in our own beings as spiritual aspirants. The yogic perspective on prejudice has different levels that I would like to get into. But a lot of it starts with education. As we know, race prejudice and other forms of prejudice and oppression are often learned behaviors. Psychologists today have plenty of evidence to show that many of these very destructive attitudes that people have were developed in their childhood. They learned it from their parents, they learned it from their community, they learned it in school. Yoga perspective recognizes reincarnation as one of the laws of creation. And therefore, we can say that a lot of these traits that people have are also carried over from past lives. That is called prenatal karma, and that includes samskaras, which are like tendencies, and even deeper are the vasanas, which are deep desires. But let's just look at one life, because we can see that whatever prenatal karma one has, still in this life, plenty is manifested in the early years of our lives that sets a tone for how we think and how we relate with others. So one of the important things from the yogic perspective is to really ensure that there is proper education. Quoting from the autobiography of a yogi, Sri Yukteswar, and that is the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, like many other sages, grieved at the materialistic trend of modern education. Few schools expound the spiritual laws for happiness. Young people who today hear in high schools and colleges that man is merely a higher animal often become atheists. They do not attempt any soul exploration or consider themselves in their essential nature to be images of God. An educational system that does not present spirit as the central fact of our existence is offering avidya, or false knowledge. And so we are starting off basically on the wrong foot. Even the sages, the great minds, these men and women in India and other parts of the world who we revere for their illumination, they grieve. They are grieving right now, and they've been grieving for probably a couple of centuries. at the materialistic trend of modern education. Certainly in India, after the British invasion occurred, any kind of spiritual or Vedic education was completely oppressed. The British not only oppressed the Indians in a religious oppression by basically banning their religion and trying to convert them, um, although they allowed some practice, individual practice, still it was oppressed. There was also a racism just on their skin color. That form of oppression was also occurring. And also a cultural one that was basically telling the Indians, you are less civilized, you are less refined, you are less educated, you are an inferior people. So the education of yoga and of the Vedas was wiped out, and child education became materialistic. We certainly see that in our times. Because we do not start our education realizing and being taught that we are made in a divine image, that we are divine, we start to identify with the animal nature, that we are somehow, by evolution, a higher animal. Then no exploration happens. Imagine if in child education, each and every child, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their gender, regardless of their religion, regardless of their economic status, etc., all of the limitations, that everyone knew fundamentally, I am made in the image of God. Now, this is not a Christian statement. This is a Vedic statement saying that the Atman, the soul, is perfect in its nature. In a smaller scale, it is a spark of the great fire. The essence of the soul is Satchitananda, but not omnipresent, not omnipotent. God, in that tattva, in that divine manifestation, is Satchitananda, without limit. But a soul is like a small individualized spark of Satchitananda. On that basis, if we started out, if all children in the world started out with that understanding, and then from there began to look at other people and themselves and people who are different, at least there would be that fundamental unity. And there would also be a higher call to behave accordingly, to act accordingly, to love accordingly. I had the privilege of being in the presence of the Dalai Lama, and it was at a conference at UC Irvine discussing education. And he said, we have excelled in educating our minds, but we have failed in educating our hearts. And so it's a similar concept. He's one of the modern sages. Sri Yukteswar, the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, wrote a magnificent short book called The Holy Science. It's been one of my favorites ever since I read it in high school. And he summarizes many other texts from India, sacred texts, such as Patanjali Yoga Sutras, some of the Upanishads, philosophy of Vedanta and Sankhya. And Sri Yukteswar distilled from those sources a very concise book. And the sutras he himself wrote, these very concise Sanskrit verses. In a nutshell, in the central part of the book where he talks about the procedure or the sadhana, or how to get reach liberation, he defines the heart as being covered or ensnared by 8 bondages, and these must be removed so that the heart can fully manifest. The heart contains within it its essence, Shraddha. And Shraddha, which is often translated as faith, Sri Yukteswar defines it as the heart's natural love. And that love has the same quality to it as the divine love of God. And even in creation, the pull, the magnetic, attractive pull that of God pulling souls back into oneness is also, he defines also as love. And that pull is within us. The natural love of the heart pulls to us our gurus, pulls to us the blessings of God, pulls to us divine friends. Then virya is also aroused. And virya, Sri Yukteswar defines as moral courage. Virya comes from the word courage. And in this context, he defines it as the strength to live according to Dharma, the strength to resist those bondages of our heart, such as hatred or fear or shame or prejudice, the strength to resist those, the strength to love, the strength to follow Dharma. Dharma is that which removes the suffering of the soul and removes the suffering of others. In order to strengthen virya, we must observe yama and niyama. And this is coming from Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is ahimsa, or non-injury to others, non-violence to others, to all beings, ahimsa, truthfulness, non-covetousness, not being greedy and wanting what others have in that kind of sense, continence or self-control, non-stealing, being content in all circumstances, purity of body and mind, self-discipline or tapasya, simple living, living within your means, and devotion to God. By observing this yama and niyama in our daily lives, our virya becomes strengthened. So that makes sense, right? The more we try to live these ways, despite failure, we gradually get stronger. And of course, it's very difficult to follow all of these perfectly. But as Yogananda ji said, the only way that a wrestler becomes stronger is by fighting a stronger wrestler. So by rising to the challenge, despite our weaknesses and our failures, we gradually strengthen virya. And the heart's natural love manifests with this strength, and the 8 bondages of the heart are removed. Then he defines the 8 bondages of the heart: hatred, shame, fear, grief, condemnation, race prejudice, pride of pedigree, smugness, or a narrow sense of respectability. After this, Sri Yukteswar goes on to define the further steps of sadhana, that once this is achieved, then we can be successful in our practice of asana, of pranayama, of pratyahara, and our other forms of meditation and devotion. It's implied that while we will do all of these devotional practices, it's implied, and also Patanjali makes this clear, we really cannot progress. We cannot advance without kind of wiping away these 8 bondages of the heart. In other words, if we're prejudiced, we are not going to find God. If we have hatred in our heart, we're not going to feel that divine love. And so these are really serious obstacles, and that's why it is very much a spiritual issue, and it is of great concern for yogis. When I interact with the spiritual community and I see that prejudice come up in discussions, or I see fear or shame or condemnation or judgment, it's something that needs to be talked about. And it's not that we all have to be perfect, or that we need to police each other. But as Sri Yukteswar says, in this stage of our lives where we cannot go back to living in ignorance and in greed, we have chosen now to embark on this spiritual path. We are aspirants, but we have not yet reached that state where we can um, perceive the divine, or we can commune with the soul. And he said this is an in-between stage called sandhisthala. This in-between stage, he says, in that stage, we need the help of one another. That is Sangha. We have to help each other, not condemn each other, but help each other through our example and through our encouragement to live this harmonious way. And that includes these issues that are often, we see them as social issues, right? I've been receiving a lot of questions in these last months. How should we as devotees or as yogis respond to a race-based, like a racial revolution, like a social revolution? How do we respond to protest? How do we respond to the debates about sexual orientation? Are we supposed to support gay marriage or not? Do yogis support gay marriage or not? Um, what do we do with women's equality? Why aren't women um, having the same equal role in a lot of spiritual communities? Why? What are we supposed to do about it? Well, I can't answer for each person. It really depends on swadharma. And this is discussed in the Bhagavad Gita in the first two chapters, where even Arjuna is asking, I'm not sure what to do, or he's trying to reject his duty. But when Sri Krishna begins to speak about duty and also about the responsibilities of Dharma, which is, Dharma is much more than duty. It can be said, you could translate it as duty, but it's much more profound. And so it depends on the individual. A mother with children has a different Dharma than a politician, or than a soldier, or than a owner of a company or a banker, right? Each person has a function. However, a yogi, if you are an aspirant or a devotee, now, this term yogi is used very casually nowadays, but I mean, if you are initiated and really dedicated in your path, or a bhakta or an aspirant, a sadhaka, someone who's really striving um, in deep study of these divine scriptures, then you actually do have a dharma. Your dharma is to manifest these soul qualities in your own life and in your sphere of influence. That's the minimum. Whether you're called to be more active um, is really up to you. But Paramahansa Yogananda, he was very active. He and other disciples at the time um, wanted to liberate their souls, but they also wanted to liberate their brethren, their brothers and sisters who are oppressed by the British government. He prayed fervently for the liberation of India. They were being oppressed, both by religion, by race. Even women were being oppressed. Part of the freedom movement, part of Gandhi's movement, Vivekananda movement, was also to liberate women, to liberate, of course, India from British rule, but also to challenge the injustices of the caste system, which was largely created by greed and control and these same things. And in one point, Yogananda ji said, he spoke about the freedom movement, and he said, those who resisted and sacrificed their lives, risked their lives for freedom, and who were imprisoned, he said, they turned the jails into a temple. And he said that in one of his recorded talks. That concept carried over later through Gandhi's movement, through his influence on Martin Luther King, that concept of nonviolent protest, where you are standing up for what you believe and standing up for justice, for spiritual principles, that you're willing even to go into jail. And that offering, that sacrifice, turns the jail into a temple. You're not going for a crime, not in God's eyes, maybe in the eyes of ignorant men who create those laws. Um, and so it really depends where your heart is, where the motive is. Um, Yogananda ji spoke a lot about Mahatma Gandhi in one of the books, Divine Romance. If you're interested, read the article called The Mystery of Mahatma Gandhi. And in there, Paramahansa Yogananda, it was a talk he gave in 1932. He speaks at length about prejudice and about the movement that Gandhiji was doing. And he touches on the race issue that he saw in America. And he says he was very surprised to see such racism in the United States of America. Even at that time, 1920, he didn't expect it to be as bad as it was. And he told a story that I would like to share. It's a deep story, but he also had a sense of humor. And in that story, he says that there was a African American janitor, and this is during the times of oppression, right? Jim Crow South, where he was not allowed. It was a segregated church, an all-white church, and he was not allowed to sit in the pews, but he was a devout Christian. And so he begged to the minister, please allow me to sit in the pews and worship Christ. And the minister agreed, but then at the last moment changed his mind and said, no, if I let you in, I will lose my congregation, because some people had already protested. This minister maybe had a good heart, so he asked some people, what do you think about this? But they rejected. So he had a good heart, but not strong. And his love was not pure enough. And so he said no. And so this janitor, this man, began to pray one day after the church was empty and he had cleaned it and he was all alone in the church. And he said, Lord, Lord, he was weeping. Why can't I come and sit in your house of worship? Why can't I sit in these pews? And Christ appeared. Jesus appeared to him and said, my child, do not be at all discouraged. This church has been built now 5 years. And for 5 years, I also have been trying to get into those pews and have not been able to. And then you hear the audience laugh. And so Yogananda ji had that understanding, and he spoke about it, not a lot, partly because he was already being watched and monitored by both the British embassy and the American officials. So he had to be careful what he spoke about publicly. Towards the end of his life in 1951, he was dedicating India Hall, and he was giving medals of honor. They were called Golden Lotus Medals of Honor. He gave one medal for the most spiritual movie of the year. And so he gave that Golden Lotus Award to a movie. Then he gave some other awards. And he gave an award to the police commissioner of Los Angeles, who himself was African American. And he said, I think it was like a citizen's award, the Golden Lotus Citizens Award, for improving race relations, specifically for improving race relations. So he was, in his way, he was engaged with these issues. And although from a spiritual standpoint, he made his voice heard and he spoke against these things. So I share those to give that example that just because it may not directly be affecting you, or just because you're not sure how to engage in these things, there are ways to do it. But the yogic path that we have committed to is one of ahimsa, and therefore we do not condone violence, but there's nonviolent ways. More specifically on the 8 bondages of the heart, Sri Yukteswar calls them like snares or binding, coming from the word basha. And I wanted to just briefly touch on one word one of them is this Jati Kula Manaha, which is what Shikteshwar wrote for race, prejudice, pride of pedigree, and narrow sense of respectability or smugness. You definitely can see that he's also responding to the times he lived in. This is British India, this is 1893. And these concepts are not emphasized in the older Hindu texts because Sanatan Dharma was not struggling with race. And it's also kind of strange to put in their race because there's only one human race. In the ancient scriptures, there are other races like Rakshasas and Asuras. So should not have prejudice towards other races. So Sri Yukteswarji is specifically bringing forth these concepts because those were the forms of prejudice that were most prevalent in his time and in his environment, and they are in ours now. So race prejudice. The next is very interesting, pedigree. The Sanskrit word is kula, and kula can mean clan. Usually kula is in India is referred to like a family clan. It can also be a spiritual clan that are like a cult almost that has gathered around a particular guru and is a little bit like a faction, but not in a dangerous sense. This is not a dangerous cult. The word cult, kulta, may have come from the word kula. It just means birds of a feather flock together. It's something that unites people. And I would say that this is one of the more profound statements that Sri Yukteswar made as something that ensnares our heart is when, and it's interesting that in the Sanskrit, he puts all of these concepts together in one word, jati kula manaha. So this manaha is like a pride, a narrow sense of pride that includes my people, right? My clan, the people that are like me, and including race prejudice. Now, obviously, that's what he was faced with. That's what India was faced with from the British. And so when we look at it from a yogic context, that the natural love of our heart will not be able to manifest. We will not be able to go forth in the various practices we do as long as we harbor any fragments of this. And so it's very serious to look at these. Sexual orientation is a more recent discussion because it had been suppressed for such a long time that no one could even bring it up. But some courageous people and movements have happened more recently so that it could come to the forefront. Historically in India, this is nothing new, but it never reached the level of discussion that it is today. And again, my conviction is that Paramahansa Yogananda's message and his life is one of love, of understanding, and of equality. And my conviction is that if he were living today, he would be a shelter, a refuge of love and understanding for all people who are oppressed. And he would speak to equality and he would try to break down barriers. And that includes the LGBTQ community now. That was not prevalent in his time. Certainly race was, and he spoke to it. But the issue of gay marriage, for example, he would bless, I believe, he would bless gay marriages. Because if you read extensively what he writes, and he didn't write much about marriage, but what he did write about marriage is in the Second Coming of Christ mostly, which was his commentary on the Bible. And he made it very clear that marriage is a union at the soul level. And he makes it very clear, and yoga also makes this clear, the soul has no gender. So if the soul has no gender, the soul has no race, the soul has no religion, even in a way, um, at its essence, the soul is manifesting qualities. And so those qualities are of two major categories, and that can be related to Prakriti and Purusha. Unfortunately, those translations have taken on a gender quality to them by saying masculine and feminine. As soon as you say masculine and feminine, our minds think man and women. But actually, Purusha and Prakriti are not meant to be connected to gender. They are forces or functions in creation. And their interaction with each other is what makes creation possible. And this is explained in the Sankhya philosophy. And so Paramahansa Yogananda ji explains that the quality that has reason being uppermost, that is related to Purusha, that is mind, that is in by nature um, has the force of going out, right? Of a projecting type of a force in nature. And Prakriti is feeling uppermost or heart uppermost. And its opposite force is one of, uh, uh, rather than projecting, it's like coming within, pulling within, drawing within, attracting within. And so a soul that is through experience, through karmas, through life, through different incarnations, starts to emphasize one of those forces. Then you add in karma and add in desire into that mix. And then when a soul is born again, then their body, their unique body, is created. And that body, whatever condition that body is, whatever the appearance that body is, whatever gender that body is a result of those things. And that is why Yogananda ji makes it very clear that, for example, in his talk on divine love, he talks about the different types of love. And he says, a, a father can express motherly love. A woman can express fatherly love because it's a quality. So that is why a feminine soul can be in a male body, or a masculine soul can be in a female body, and even a combination of the two. There are some unique karmas that manifest a transgender body. Um, when he talks about marriage, he talks about the emphasis. He says it's not just for procreation, and that is largely a religious argument against gay marriage, is on that fundamental issue of procreation and having children. But Paramahansa ji says that the sin of wrong marriage, because he commented on how sometimes divorce is necessary because the marriage was wrong from the very beginning. And he says the sin of marrying the wrong person is actuated by social custom or physical instinct. Just two things: social custom, physical instinct. So let's look at the gay marriage issue, or the interracial marriage issue, which is something that is a prejudice and is a cause for a lot of pain and suffering and hatred, condemnation. None of those are yogic qualities. But we should look at them as yogis, not from a social view. So social custom, that's the word that Paramahansa uses. If a marriage occurs because of social custom, it's bound, it's likely it will fail. Not bound to fail, but likely to fail. I would also say that if a marriage does not happen because of social custom, right? There are often times where two people truly come together in love and they are not allowed to marry for one of these social customs. Or physical instinct. Physical instinct is simply people who marry for no other reason than physical attraction. The sexual pull together. He says that is also not sustainable. Love cannot thrive in that. Now, it does not mean that physical attraction doesn't have a part to play. He says that it does. But we can see from that statement alone that marriage is not meant just for procreation, nor is it meant just as a social custom. When he goes more in depth about it, it is that two souls come together, manifesting complementary qualities, but different qualities. That's what attracts. That is the law of attraction, is just like with magnets, a plus and a minus magnetic pull together. Obviously, there's similarities as well. And in order to reach a balance, these two souls come together to support one another for spiritual growth, illumination, to make themselves better, and to balance one another. So the masculine quality will be balanced with more of the feminine and vice versa. Again, this can happen in a gay marriage, no problem. And I see it happen all the time. And to have children in that as a family unit, again, it's optional. There are many married couples who choose not to have children, but they're still married. That's no sin, because they're wanting to be together. Maybe they cannot have children, and they choose not to adopt. We cannot judge these things. And Yogananda ji did not judge. He made it very clear why two souls come together. And so child rearing or having a strong family unit is based again on qualities of love, on qualities of right discipline, on guidance, on security and stability, on honesty. These principles apply whether it's a gay couple or not. It's just how to raise a soul, how to spiritually bring up children. And so it's foolish for someone to say that that's impossible in a gay marriage, because there's no physical reason why any of those things would happen. So it's important to understand again from that yogic perspective. We could have the same reasonings for just about any other form of oppression. Other forms of prejudice spring forth from the ego's identification with what it is, its form. And this is another yogic perspective on prejudice. Our identification, which is, we can say, asmita, which is more of like the individualized ego, or this ahankara. And also another term that Patanjali uses is abhinivesha, which is like being so identified with this physical body that it results in being afraid of death. But the soul says, well, how I'm not the body, I don't die. We care for the body, but we are not the body. The light that flows into the light bulb is the light. The bulb is not the light. The bulb holds the light. And so, first and foremost, we must identify more and more with our nature as the soul, as the Atman, and we must also see everyone else, despite their differences, also as a soul. That is the first and most fundamental cure for prejudice. Is first, I am Atman, and everyone else is also the soul. Secondly, and this takes some time, obviously, this identification, but what the constructs of the ego that build around this identification. Oh, I am a soul. I am a body now. Oh, I'm a man, or I'm a woman. Oh, I am this color. Slowly, these constructs begin to build, and these are the entrapments that cover up our heart, where we develop an inferiority complex or a superiority complex, or we start to feel shame. One of the 8 ensnarements is lajja. Lajja is often this kind of shame. It used to be translated as modesty. I've seen that translation. But looking into it further and studying it further and talking with some people about that, it's likely that lajja, which means shame, is translated into modesty because of the shaming of women, the shaming towards women, that misogyny, that degrading women somehow as being the cause of man's downfall, right? Because of it's the weakness of the man in many cases, not the woman. And so this shaming of sex, the shaming of the body, the shaming was directed towards women. And therefore, modesty was expected, um, out of shame, shame on you, right? And so, but lajja in its deepest meaning is shame. And think how we may feel shame about ourselves, or we may shame others. We may feel shame about our bodies. Think of women or people of color who are growing up in today's society, how much shame they feel about their own body or their own appearance. Um, so these identification and then these constructs that manifest, we have to be aware of them and challenge them. First and foremost within our own selves, but also within our immediate sphere of influence. What is the solution to these 8 meannesses that seem to arise within us? How do we deal with those? Well, when things are very heightened right now in society, it's a wonderful opportunity. We are being challenged. We are being challenged. And that's why I personally celebrate the amount of diversity and difference that there is right now, because I see it's a wonderful opportunity to challenge myself. If everyone were the same, it would be so much easier. How would any of these 8 meannesses be revealed? How would shame and condemnation and race prejudice be revealed if everyone was the same? And so test yourself. This is how I've approached it. When you see any kind of judgment or anger towards someone, or a condemnation, or your own self feeling ashamed or angry at yourself or anything, try to find it. And what Patanjali instructs is, once you identify one of these bondages, these ensnarements, or these kleshas, or these non-divine qualities, identify it and then manifest, move into in the opposite direction. So you try to more or less find the opposite. So if it's shame, shaming someone else, well, what would be the opposite? It would be respecting that person, seeing their divine qualities, and respecting their uniqueness. If it's shame towards oneself, then maybe it's more of a healthy self-acceptance, a healthy pride. And then you just try to focus in that other direction, and by repetition, by abhyasa yoga, by repeating, go in that other direction, praying for God's grace to manifest. A beautiful prayer is, O Divine Mother, teach me to love like you love. O Divine Beloved God, I want to love others as you love others. I want to understand others as you love others. That is the highest. If you don't think that you yourself are capable of loving others, then imagine that God's love is flowing through you and gives you the courage to rise above and love in the face of your own weaknesses. Now, this idea of don't identify with your soul, don't identify with your body, this has been twisted in a lot of spiritual communities as, I use the term now, it's been weaponized, which is basically taking a spiritual principle and using it as another tool of shame or division or oppression. And so often what you'll hear is, let's say someone who is oppressed, a woman who's being oppressed in her spiritual community, or a person of color who's being suppressed, and they say, well, I'm being treated this way because I'm a woman. Often the response is, oh, well, don't be identified with that, you're the soul. Don't concentrate on the color of your skin, you are the soul, you are Atman. And so what it's effectively doing is it's furthering that oppression by disregarding what that person is. And so this brings me to a very subtle point, and I'll see if I can, how well I can express it. Form, which is also called rupa, is seen in 2 ways. It pulls together God, they're the formless qualities, in a way that seems like it's limiting. But actually, form or rupa reveals God. If God was not in form, we would not be able to perceive God. And so the instruction of predominantly of Bhakti Yoga, but of others, even in Patanjali Yoga, is first to acknowledge and to worship and to know the form of the divine. And then gradually the formless might become revealed, or the form will expand. And so it's not a rejection of form, because form does not conceal God, form reveals God. This is a deep point. And it's the exact same with the soul, but on a smaller scale. And so your form, the body that you have, the personality that you have, the qualities that you manifest, do not conceal you, your Atman. They reveal you. They reveal the unique expression of the divine that you are. First, I must know you. I must know that form. We must know ourselves, respect ourselves, and acknowledge that. And then I can know you more, or my perception or understanding of you can expand. Same with our expression. Now, if you were to say, well, let's just disregard our form, well, imagine disregarding the form of your guru, or disregarding the form of your Ishtadevata, of Shri Krishna or Kali. Oh, just disregard it. It doesn't mean anything. No, the form is divine. And so the yogic perspective in relation to this body identification is, yes, we are not limited to the body. However, the body is what is expressing and manifesting the soul. Therefore, it must be celebrated. And that is why it's actually a joyous experience and a very uniting experience for the yogi to look around at all of the diversity. And I think personally myself, how many different types of people I have met throughout my life, in my travels. Each and every person is completely unique. And what is being revealed to me in their uniqueness is a fragment of the soul, of some aspect of God, some spark of God. And so remember that when you hear that kind of talk of like, oh, we'll just sort of disregard your form, or suppress it. No, no, no. You have to um, acknowledge that your form is a manifestation of all that, of the Atman, including the flaws, including the weaknesses, including our struggles. But it cannot be used, weaponized as a condemning tool. So religion can often be weaponized, and I'll close with this beautiful story, and many of you in the Christian faith have heard this, but it always stuck with me. When I would see it in the movie Jesus of Nazareth when I was a kid, and we would see it sometimes in the ashram. A woman is being persecuted by some villagers. I think it was for adultery or something. And they were all picking up stones, and they're ready to throw stones at her. And I remember when I saw the movie as a child, I was terrified. And they were going to throw stones. And I remember asking my parents, what's going on? My father said, oh, that was the law back then. They could have stoned her to death. It was just shocking. But Jesus intervened. They saw him, and he was revered as a master of their faith. And they said, Rabbi, what should we do? And he said, he who was out without sin cast the first stone. And slowly, one by one, they all dropped their stones and walked away. And then she was freed. And he walked over to her and he blessed her. And she was weeping and smiling. And you see, he saw her soul. He saw her divinity. He recognized her Atman. There was no shame. There was no condemnation. There was no prejudice. And same with the others, even the oppressors. And you see, in that moment, not only did he liberate the oppressed, he also liberated the oppressors, at least in that moment. Now, I will add that anyone who is the oppressor, anyone who's on the aggressive end of harming another person, they are much more closed off to God. Because look, in that instance, those men that were going to throw the stones, and they had hatred, condemnation, shame, all of this, violence, prejudice, hate towards women, hypocrisy, all of that. Yes, they dropped their stones. They realized he was right, but all of them walked away. And so they didn't receive a further blessing from Jesus. None of them ran up to him and touched his feet and fell to his feet and said, "You have shown me of my sin, free me," or anything like that. They didn't have like a catharsis. They walked away grudgingly. Because the attachments that are around oppression are in a place of false strength, a false sense of strength, a false sense of knowing. And that construct of the ego is much more dangerous and much more difficult to break down. On the oppressed side, there is weakness. And in that weakness, there is often a hopelessness or a humility where they call out. And that is why Jesus said, "Blessed are they. Blessed are they." And so because she was vulnerable, because she was in a place of weakness, she was standing there and he was able to convey a divine blessing to her. And he said to her, "Go and sin no more." But he didn't say it with shame or condemnation. He said it with love. And really, I'm sure what it felt like was, go and live as the soul. Go and live love. Be the highest. Be the best that you are. And so who are we to be stone throwers on any issue? On any issue today that's social, but even on a personal level. Think of family members, think of people in your community, people with different political views, all these false divisions. Well, who are you? You look at how you have identified it, the pride and, oh, this is who I am, I'm better, or I'm worse. And ask yourself if you have a stone in your hand. Judge not that you be not judged. The yogi seeks only to disarm those types of fights. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up for truth, but this aggression and shame has no place in a spiritual life. And so I would like to close with some beautiful words of Paramahansa Yogananda, who lived a life of love, of inclusiveness. He did not exclude anyone. And he did not seek to convert people or to make them his own followers. He spoke love. He represented it in a strong way. He even illegally married a dark man from India with a white woman from America. And that was illegal in India. It was illegal in California, in the state of California. Interracial marriage was illegal. People of different color could not marry. And he married them and he filmed it. And he said, "May this marriage be symbolic of breaking down barriers." He did represent that. He built a church of all religions. He spoke about religious inclusion long before it became fashionable to have interfaith dialogue. He spoke against race prejudice. He wanted to empower women. He even put women in charge of his organization, which was very rare in those times. Sister Gyanamata, he upheld her as an exemplary and put her in charge of the ashram when he would go on tour. And I know that he would be that way now for any other oppressed peoples. And I specifically want to reiterate about sexual orientation, because just because that didn't happen in his lifetime doesn't mean that, oh, now that means that it didn't fall under his love. There's a few sentences that he has said about marriage between a man and a woman, husband and wife, that a few people have interpreted as being anti-gay or against gay marriage. And they forget about the thousands of other quotes about love, about compassion, about understanding, and about the true nature of the soul. And it reminds me of, he knew so much about reincarnation that one time a woman approached him and he looked at her and said, "General, because he recognized her as one of his disciples from a previous life. And he said that in a previous life, that soul was a man in a man's body and was a general in some kind of a army or military. And that soul for many lives had manifested those qualities and therefore had attracted and manifested a man's body. But in this incarnation, that soul had a woman's body. And so when that woman in body came up, he saw the soul and said, General. That's the level that he looked at. And that's what a true yogi will do. And we say, oh, well, I've been a Kriyaban for this many years. Oh, I've been a devotee for this long, with whatever path you say, oh, I've been a good Christian for this long. And that spiritual pride creeps in. And we start to think that somehow we are above these types of things. But then we'll be tested. We'll be tested with someone who's different. We'll be tested with someone who, for whatever reason, threatens our ego constructs. We should always look past that and do that by love. And this poem, when I read these, sometimes I think, oh, are people going to think that he sounds like a flower child, But all of these thoughts and all of these expressions, Paramahansa Yogananda wrote them long before the 1960s movement, where love was used in so many different ways. Love is a force. Universality is. And that love is an accomplishment of the yoga path, of the Vedic culture. That love and that understanding of love and understanding of universality, that's what fueled the nonviolent movement in India, which had never happened in recorded history, that the British Empire fell because of a nonviolent movement of love. That same love runs in the veins of all of the texts of the Indian scriptures, of the Yoga Sutras, of the Upanishads. It is these 8 meannesses of the heart, these 8 snares of the heart that have crept into people, that have polluted it and polluted society. And so this poem, I Am Love, or this inspiration, is what I would like to close with. I embrace as my own loved ones the flowers of all things, blossoming in the garden of earth and sky, for I am love. I welcome all races, the olive, the white, the dark, yellow and red, to their home in my bosom, to live with me as my brothers and sisters, born of common parents of our beloved God. I embrace the earth, water, fire, air, ether, as my blood relations, one common life roaming through my veins in every form that lives. I enfold all animals, plants, beloved atoms and energies in the temple of my life, for I am love. I am life itself. I love all religions. They are born of my love and wisdom. I love all humans, enemies and friends alike, for they are born of my divine Father, and I am love itself. And so, friends, may we renew our efforts to live and manifest that love with strength, and to continue as yogi aspirants in whatever path we are on, to manifest these divine qualities. And despite our weaknesses, despite our failures, to keep working on ourselves, to keep improving ourselves, to these challenges that we are faced with, and to rise to the occasion, to have the strength to love, the strength to expand beyond social customs, beyond the bondages of our heart, and truly liberate our minds, our hearts, so that we can freely serve our brothers and sisters and give love to all. Jai Ma, Jai Guru. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.